Ambassador Haggag, now obviously there is a lot to talk about, but let's take it step by step. You first mentioned the healthcare file, and the President mentioned the 100 Million Lives initiative. The President said that 60 million have already been tested, and the healthcare insurance system is already it started its first steps to be applied here, and he has his goals to actually spread it not just in Egypt but also the rest of the African states. Can you describe your imagination of how such a system, such an initiative can be taken not just in Egypt but also spread across the African countries?
We have to notice that the General Assembly every year is the biggest world gathering, not only for member states, but from all international organization, World Health Organization, who was its head was here in Egypt and met President Sisi and lauded very much the health program of Egypt and appreciated the assistance to be rendered to African citizens. The World Bank, the IMF, a lot of NGOs, and it has a lot of publicity. If you have seen that his meeting with President Sisi, with President Trump, was aired live to American audience, not only to American audience, but all over the world.
Yes.
So it have a multiple effect, putting Egypt point of view and the excellent relations between United States and Egypt. President Trump was accompanied with all prominent African ministers, as also American ministers. Sorry, yeah. So I think it is. But you were asking about how it is going to be implemented.
Yes.
We have to bring it to the Egyptian African people. Like your program, if it's watched in Africa, and I think so, from South Africa and Addis Ababa, Nairobi, and so on, they will be conscious about the role which is President Sisi, speaking on their behalf, is trying to put the African position forward, and he's stressing the important that the international community, the financial institutions, should render concessionary terms in assisting African countries. But he mentioned one thing, I think, which caught the attention of many Africans, that Africans should African solutions for African problems. So he is laying the point that Africans have to take the lead in finding solutions to their own problems. They will welcome foreign assistance, but they have to be in the forefront of finding an African solution. Especially their continent will be in the forefront, being affected by climate change and economic development. The continental free trade zone will bring integration in Africa. It will increase inter-African trade. So he has to put to the people of Africa the challenges and also the solutions which will bring prosperity to African people.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely there's a lot of importance pinpointed on the President Sisi's participation in the UN General Assembly, the 74th round of its sessions. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattahs Sisi's participation for the 6th time in the annual meetings of the UN General Assembly to express Egypt's views towards regional challenges and contribute to promoting international efforts to fight terrorism, as well as draw up comprehensive visions on strengthening joint global action to serve development issues, most importantly boost the implementation of the African Agenda 2063 for inclusive economic growth and sustainable development. The top diplomat, who is currently in New York for the 74th UN General Assembly session, pointed out that Egypt has always been keen during all UNGA meetings to underline its commitment to preserving global peace and security and serving Arab causes topped by the Palestinian issue and the restoration of the legitimate Palestinian rights. He noted that the President's address to the 74th session of the UN General Assembly, whose high-level general debate kicked off on Tuesday, expands the Egyptian vision towards promoting global joint action and highlights challenges facing the Middle East region, including terrorism, the Palestinian issue, as well as development. President Sisi's address also tackled Africa's economic development and integration efforts, the help the continent needs to fund its infrastructural projects, and implement agreements to boost intra-African trade. He also said the 2019 UN General Assembly focuses on important topics such as climate change, financing for sustainable development, universal health coverage, and improving people's living conditions. He added that this year President Sisi is attending the UNGA meetings in his capacity as not only the President of Egypt but also the Chairman of the African Union, pointing out that as such is the case, the President addressed the international gathering on African priorities as well as Egypt's national priorities. These include investing in human capital and helping other African states in their capacity building and education, healthcare development efforts facing terrorism as well as climate change. He also added that during his stay in New York, the President had a number of meetings at a bilateral level with many world leaders. The U.S. President citing a meeting the President was holding with senior representatives of major U.S. companies, including those who are investing or wishing to invest in Egypt. He added the President's agenda on the sidelines of the UNGA session also includes multilateral and bilateral meetings with a number of world leaders with the aim of boosting Egypt's cooperation with the respective countries.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Haggag, now about speaking for other African states. Now, the President actually spoke for Sudan, and he was asking that the U.S. would scrap it out of its list of countries sponsoring terrorism. How do you view the handling of the situation in Sudan? Obviously forming a new cabinet, and now the President speaking for Sudan within the UN General Assembly. How responsive do you think the UN and the US would respond to his claim?
I think Sudanese appreciate the role of President Sisi as chairman of the President of the African Union, which has sponsored the talks between the opposition and the military council in Sudan. As you know, at present in Cairo, there are some leaders of armed groups which are going to negotiate with Sudanese government in order to find solution to their grievances. And Sudanese government is keen to end once for all armed groups' grievances in, either in Darfur, in Nuba Mountains, or in other parts on Africa and in Sudan. Sudan is a huge country. It's the biggest country, so it will not be able to go on a very economic development program unless it manages to bring an end to these armed groups.
Yes.
And I think the call of President Sisi for the lifting of putting of Sudan on the list of countries assisting terrorism is fair enough. It's not only coming from Egypt, which is a neighboring big neighbor of Sudan, but from the chairman of the African Union itself. And I think it will be have a double effect in this regard.
Yeah.
The Americans are saying, yes, we'll do that, but it will take between 9 months and 1 year. But nevertheless, it's on the table now, and I think it will assist the Sudanese government a lot.
Yes. What about the issue that's being dealt with and put forward timelessly before the UN General Assembly and in many other international meetings and summits, the Palestinian issue? Now, how responsive do you think the UN and the international community and world leaders would respond to still the main request for finding a political, stable, diplomatic solution for the Palestinian issue? Obviously now Israel's going through its own elections. How responsive do you think they will be?
I think the record of the United Nations, including not only the General Assembly resolutions, which are recommendations but not resolution to be implemented, but there are other resolution of United Security Council.
Yes.
I was attached to the Egyptian mission to the United Nations in the 70s of last century, and we managed to bring very strong resolutions concerning the Palestinian issue with the support of the Americans. So the Americans were also supporting. I know Trump administration is very close to Israel, but I think once you have a resolution of the United Nations, of the Security Council from 242 to the last resolution against the settlements of the Obama administration, it is binding to all the members of the United Nations. So I think it is to put the spotlight on the Palestinian issues and the unjust treatment of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, that the settlements is against international law, and the record of the majority of members of the United Nations. I think it's supporting the Palestinian issue, and they are calling for the two-state resolution. This is the only way how to deal with and they are not supporting Mr. Netanyahu call for the annexation of the occupied territories under the guise it's protecting the security of Israel. So nobody is buying this pretext.
Ambassador Haggag, we've mentioned the meeting of President Sisi with his counterpart, President Donald Trump. He also met with the French President Emmanuel Macron, and during his meeting, our presidential spokesman Bassam Radi mentioned that they spoke as well of the Libyan situation, our Western neighbors. What can be done as a result of these meetings, especially with France discussing the Libyan situation? What can be done for the future of ending such a crisis in Libya?
President Sisi spoke also on the Libyan situation with the Prime Minister of Italy. And Italy and France are going to sponsor a conference concerning Libya the day after tomorrow, on Thursday. And I think there will be a call for the cessation of interference in the Libyan internal affairs. There are certain countries, organizations, Turkey, Qatar, who are supporting one side of the war with not only with weapons but with money and political support. But we have to put an end to this unuseful confrontation. So the Libyan people who are suffering a lot, there is a lack of finance. Libya is very rich in oil, but they are lacking in finances. So nobody can imagine this situation. And the Libyans are having a problem about African migration to Europe.
Yes.
So the Europeans have an interest to have a calm situation in Libya and trying to assist. And I hope President Sisi was telling them they have to be fair, not to put their sympathies and support on one side and neglecting the other side. So I think there is a lot of movement in the General Assembly now, and with other leaders, European Union, especially Italy and France, concerning the Libyan situation.
Yes.
I think the United States have expressed its opinion before. They have still an interest. They have oil companies who are working in Libya, and Libya is having the attention of the world now.
Yes. Mr. Ambassador, now you've mentioned the problem of illegal migration. Now Egypt has proved and shown great achievements and performance dealing with illegal migration, refugees, dealing with combating terrorism. Now, how can the international community meeting at the UN General Assembly actually make use of such an experience in achieving that, and in return Egypt would benefit from other things that it would be demanding?
I think Egypt have done this without asking for any assistance from European countries, not like Turkey, who was trying to blackmail the Europeans in order to assist. He said that, I just heard before coming here, President Erdogan was complaining that the Europeans gave him only $3 billion. Immediately the European Union said, no, you have taken 6 billion euros in order to assist you about the migration, about Syrian migration. So Egypt is not selfish to ask for money, but they have done that they're trying to convince Europeans in order to put an end to this migration, try to assist African countries to find a solution to the unemployment, to find jobs for the youth of Africa. And we assure you that they will be not looking to go to Europe and having an arduous journey. Many of them are drowned in the Mediterranean. So it's better to invest in Africa and try to convince the African countries that you are sincere, not only by preventing the African migration, but investing in Africa itself to find jobs for the African youth.
Yes. Your Excellency, now Egypt goes into this UN General Assembly, and it's potentially an enormous energy hub now after the exploration of natural gas. Also, with its proximity and its relations and its political role being played within North Africa, the African continent as a whole, and also the Gulf, and with what's taking place and the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia and Iran and Yemen now. So Egypt seems to be a main player geographically and politically situated in the midst of all of these files. Does that give Egypt some sort of an upper hand, good cards to play, being in that position within the UN General Assembly among all the world leaders?
I think Egypt program for many years now in Africa is well known. Although Egypt is not abundant of money and very rich, but it giving a lot of assistance to African countries. Not only we have seen the consignments of supplies to Sudan to assist in victims who were affected by the extreme rain, but to many African countries, including the African Union Secretariat itself. We are the biggest contributors to the budget of the African Union. We are the biggest country in the African Development Banks, which is assisting many African countries in their development programs. And I think President Sisi does not spare a moment in his visits to Europe as a president of Egypt to speak about Africa. So it is, Egypt has a big experience now in anti-terrorism, which I think President Trump acknowledged in his meeting with President Sisi yesterday. And he appreciated what the effort that Egypt is doing. And we are also trying to combat terrorism by development programs in Sinai, and trying to convince that terrorism is not only an Egyptian problem, but it is a problem for whole mankind, especially European countries, because terrorism has no particular friends. They have a lot of enemies, so they are spreading their wing to Europe. So we need collaboration among world countries, not to give refuge to terrorist organizations, and not to assist terrorism with money. You have to prevent them from taking assistance from dubious sources, either countries or intelligence agencies and so on. So I think Egypt is playing its role quietly. We are not bragging about what we are doing, but it is highly appreciated by international community and African peoples themselves.
Yes. Well, Your Excellency, now Egypt is head of the African Union, goes into this UN Assembly as head of the AU, but with the time remaining of Egypt's presidency of the African Union, how much can be achieved of all these issues that have been put forward for the African continent, all the African states? How can we guarantee a pacey reaction for the rest of Africa while we're still presidents of the African Union?
I assure you that Egypt's efforts in Africa will not cease after the end of the mandate of President Sisi in next February. It will continue working for Africa also. And I think one of the major achievements of President Sisi is bringing this realization of the African continental free trade zone. It will tremendously help Egypt exports to Africa and Egypt imports from Africa also, because we need a lot of raw material for Egyptian industry, and it will lead a lot of economic revival among African countries. So I think the continuation of Egyptian policy in Africa is not tied only to its presidency of the African Union, but it will continue as it was in the past.
Yes. Well, Mr. Ambassador, you've mentioned in many of your answers and replies that a solution, a main way to solve a lot of the issues is the working on the development, the economic and social development within Egypt and within the other African countries. Does that mean that after such a meeting, should we expect a lot of trade and economic and developmental agreements being signed between Egypt and other countries, European and the US as well for the African countries?
I tell you one example. After Egypt joined the COMESA sub-regional organization, Egypt exports to, they have a free trade zone. It is the biggest sub-regional organization bloc in Africa, and Egypt export to the countries of this region almost doubled.
Yes.
And I think with the African Trade Union continental free zone, it will also assist a lot of but Egyptian industry, Egyptian business people have to take good advantage of this, not to wait till the government try to persuade them to work with Africa. Many good African, I toured many African countries. I noticed the presence of good conscientious Egyptian business people in many African countries are working, and they're employing a lot of Africans, but also increasing their input in African development itself. Yes. In Ethiopia, in Cameroon, in Zambia, in Kenya. Egypt also have a big program in sending doctors, engineers, university professors to many African, and we always say that we are the almost only African countries which are sending its expertise and manpower without charging anything. So, and Egypt was training a lot of thousands of African, including military, diplomats, trade unions, nursing, and so on, here in Egypt every year.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely there's a lot of issues to be discussed and files to be presented in the 74th round of the UN General Assembly taking place now in New York, and definitely these are all great efforts, but as His Excellency Ambassador Haggag mentioned, people need to seize the moment, seize the opportunities, work on them, and make the most out of the potential that is surrounding us everywhere. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Ambassador Ahmed Haggag, former Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of African Union. Your Excellency, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.